Hello, RMS 7th graders. Today for iTime, we're going to be reading a story called All the Good Things. Hopefully this helps you come up with ideas of people you are grateful for and want to let them know how much you have learned or how much you appreciate them or what you appreciate about a quality of them. So here's a story called All the Good Things. Just for a heads up too, in this case the story is about a student at a private school, so when you hear the word sister, they're actually talking about a teacher. Alright, so sister just means a teacher. It's a religious teacher, someone with a religious background, and that's the teacher at the private school. Alright, the story is called All the Good Things. He was in the 3rd grade class I taught at St. Mary's School in Morris, Minnesota. All 34 of my students were dear to me, but Mark Eklund was one in a million. Very neat in appearance, he had that happy to be alive attitude that made even his occasional mischievousness delightful. Mark also talked incessantly. I tried to remind him again and again that talking without permission was not acceptable. What impressed me so much, though, was the sincere response every time I had to correct him for misbehaving. "Thank you for correcting me, sister." I didn't know what to make of it at first, but before long I became accustomed to hearing it many times a day. One morning, my patience was growing thin when Mark talked once too often. I made a novice teacher mistake. I looked at Mark and said, "If you say one more word, I'm going to tape your mouth shut." It wasn't 10 seconds later when Chuck blurted out, "Mark is talking again." I hadn't asked any of the students to help me watch Mark, but since I had stated the punishment in front of the class, I had to act on it. I remember the scene as if it were occurring this morning. I walked to my desk drawer, very deliberately opened the drawer, and took out a roll of masking tape. Without saying a word, I proceeded to Mark's desk, tore off 2 pieces of tape, and made a big X with them over his mouth. I then returned to the front of the room. As I glanced at Mark to see what he was doing or how he was doing, he winked at me. That did it. I started laughing. The entire class cheered as I walked back to Mark's desk, removed the tape, and shrugged my shoulders. His first words were, "Thank you for correcting me, sister." At the end of the year, I was asked to teach junior high math. The years flew by, and before I knew it, Mark was in my classroom again. He was more handsome than ever and just as polite. Since he had to listen carefully to my instructions in the new math, he did not talk as much in 9th grade. One Friday, things just didn't feel right. We had worked hard on a new concept all week, and I sensed that the students were growing frustrated with themselves and edgy with one another. I had to stop this crankiness before it got out of hand, so I asked them to list the names of the other students in the room on 2 sheets of paper, leaving a space between each name. Then I told them to think of the nicest thing that they could say about each of their classmates and write it down. It took the remainder of the class period to finish the assignment, but as the students left the room, each one handed me their papers. Chuck smiled. Mark said, "Thank you for teaching me, sister. Have a good weekend." That Saturday, I wrote down the name of each student on a separate sheet of paper, and I listed what everyone else had said about that individual. On Monday, I gave each student his or her list. Some of them ran 2 pages, and before long, the entire class was smiling. "Really?" I heard whispered. "I never do that anything to anyone." I didn't know others liked me so much. No one ever mentioned these papers in class again. I never knew if they discussed them after class or with their parents, but that didn't matter. The exercise had accomplished its purpose. The students were happy with themselves and one another again, and then that group of students moved on. Several years later, after I had returned from a vacation with my parents, they met me at the airport. As we were driving home, Mother asked the usual questions about the trip. How was the weather, and my experiences in general. There was a slight lull in the conversation, and Mother gave Dad a sideways glance and simply said, "Dad?" My father cleared his throat. "The Eklunds called last night," and he began. "Really?" I said. "I haven't heard from them for several years. I wonder how Mark is." Dad responded quietly. "Mark was killed in Vietnam in the war," he said. "The funeral is tomorrow, and his parents would like it if you could attend." To this day, I can still point the exact spot on I-494 where Dad told me about Mark. I had never seen a serviceman in a military coffin before. He looked so handsome, so mature. All I could think at that moment was, "Mark, I would give all the masking tape in the world if only you could talk to me." The church was packed with Mark's friends. Chuck's sister sang the Battle of Hymn of the Republic. Why did it have to rain on the day of the funeral? It was difficult enough at the graveside. The pastor said the usual prayers, and the bugler played taps. One by one, those who loved Mark took a last walk by the coffin and sprinkled it with holy water. I was the last one to bless the coffin, and as I stood there, one of the soldiers who acted as a pallbearer came to me. Were you Mark's math teacher?" he asked. I nodded as I continued to stare at the coffin. "Mark talked about you a lot," he said. After the funeral, most of Mark's former classmates headed to Chuck's farmhouse for lunch. Mark's mother and father were there, obviously waiting for me. "We want to show you something," his father said, taking a wallet out of his pocket. "They found this on Mark when he was killed. We thought you might recognize it." Opening the billfold, he carefully removed 2 worn pieces of notebook paper that had obviously been taped, folded, and refolded many times. I knew without looking that the papers were the ones in which I had listed all the good things of Mark's classmates had said about him. "Thank you so much for doing that," Mark's mother said. As you can see, Mark treasured it. Mark's classmates started to gather around us. Chuck smiled rather sheepishly and said, "I still have my list. It's in the top drawer of my desk at home." John's wife said, "John asked me to put his in our wedding album." "I have mine too," Marilyn said. "It's in my diary." Then Vicky, another classmate, reached into her pocket, took out her wallet, and she showed her worn and frazzled list to the group. "I carry this with me at all times," Vicky said without batting an eyelash. "I wish we all saved our list." That's when I finally sat down and cried. I cried for Mark and for all his friends who never would see him again. That is the end of the story. Thank you guys for listening. Now we'll discuss.